I think there's some very concerning vulnerabilities with the online left wing movement. And that you're probably not going to hear this from anywhere else is actually one of those vulnerabilities. Right? There's a bit of an echo chamber which is created because I see an extreme lack of good faith critique of the left wing movement. You mainly have a lot of bad faith and very dishonest critique coming from the right wing, painting them all as communists who just want to get rid of the police and, don't have any borders, which there's certainly people on the left that have that perspective, but to do the opposite of Steelman and make the entire movement that, not a good faith thing to do, right? But these are the primary sources of critique that the left sees, bad faith, right? The other ones are the uninformed, the centrists who are isolated from a lot of the pains that people are dealing with in this country, such that they're blind to the suffering. Or perhaps their own self-interest is the issue. Because if you're focused on moving up the ladder in your career and your family and your vacation and this and that and starting some business, not really engaged in politics, the main noise you hear is bad faith critiques coming from the right. You're not a right-winger, so you're not fully on board with it, but some of what they're saying, it seeps in to your thinking. And you end up attacking the left as an uninformed person, not even fully understanding what the left even stands for. And then among the left itself, you mainly have, in my view, this is an oversimplification, but you have people who are, near the perimeter. So they are, the closest to the center, more progressive types who have the most limited vision, shall we say. Their ideas of what is possible are, to be frank, pathetic. So they seek to solve a lot of the fundamental problems that the left broadly wants to solve, but they don't go nearly far enough. They lack the vision. They are the ones who will talk about you can't get everything you want, as if anyone's advocating to get everything you want. No one is perfect, as if anyone's advocating for anyone to be perfect. They may even be condescending. You're like a child. You don't understand how politics works. There's a procedure, and there's more to it. It's not black and white, which are true statements. However, it's not an excuse for having a lack of vision, right? The critiques that they will get will be from people who are further to the left, who have greater vision, who would want to push for even more. So they critique the sort of center left as just not being aggressive enough, not realizing how bad things are, and perhaps a lot of these center left people are representing more people who are doing better off than the broader left. So they perhaps don't see how bad things really are. And then if you just keep going further left, it's just a matter of, you're not the real left, we're the real left, you're not going further, you need to go further than that. But I think a lot of that also gets drowned out by a lot of noise from the online influencer class, or the parasite class, if you ask me, many of them, who are just focused on the attention economy. They're all trying to, this is how they pay their bills, right? They got to get the clicks, got to get the engagement. Some of them maybe not so cynical, but the algorithm has an effect on you. This is what you do for a living. If you do politics for a living, man, as a human being, and I've done YouTube as a business. Like this is like basically a labor of love for me. I don't make any money doing this, right? But I've done it as a business. I know what it can do to you. Fortunately, I come from a good base in terms of who my character is, so I am not so vulnerable as others, but I'm still human. So I've seen what it can do when you get caught up in the metrics and the numbers and how good your channel is doing and what videos get views and what videos don't get views. So even if you're a good faith actor, you can lose yourself, man. Things are moving so fast. There's a new thing that's trending, some news story. You want to get it out before your competition does, and you get caught up, right? So you have a lot of people who are disconnected, I think, in influencer class from the people. These are people who, they're making their own money. A lot of them making decent money, not money like on the right, but they're making good money. They got their health care. They got their housing situation, right? They don't have some crazy corporate boss that's going to lay them off any minute now. And they live in this online world where it's just in their bubbles, like left-wing Twitter, right? So this echo chamber, and that creates a level of blindness. But these are the thought leaders of the left, right? And if they're blind and they're distracted by their businesses, which is what they're running, right? Then what does that say for the voters? So one of the big blind spots I wanted to point out, beyond the lack of good faith critique, which is unhealthy. Ironically, one of the arguments these same people would make with corporations applies to them and their ideology, but I think many don't think about this, right? Competition, right? You want to have more competition. Competition is good. You have a lot of competition. You got to compete, right? I hate to sound like a Dave Rubin talking about the marketplace of ideas, but if you're in a movement and you're used to being able to easily dismiss critics because, again, the pool is not very good, right? So you kind of get in the habit of not really taking people seriously, and in many cases, probably the right approach because, again, a lot of bad faith actors. But how do you get to be better, right? If you have a monopoly, which is kind of what's happening in some ways, right? If you have a monopoly as a corporation, what is your inspiration to innovate, right? So the progressive movement, what would inspire them to innovate, right? They have a lot of ideas. They have some policies they push for. What would inspire them to innovate on those policies, make them better than they are, as opposed to just it's something that's been pushed in their bubble. They keep hearing it from their thought leaders. They just sort of digest it and then they echo it. Yeah, housing should be a right. Housing should be a right. Not really taking the time to really think about what that means and how to do it. And again, the only critiques they hear are people who are just ignorant or people who are being bad faith. So they're kind of getting emboldened that these ideas are actually good ideas, because if they were bad ideas, where are the critiques, right? There'd be people critiquing it, right? If the only people that can critique, they're lying or they just don't understand, then obviously these ideas are great, right? But there's lots of flaws in those ideas, but who's going to reveal them, right? What is the incentive to reveal the flaws? I keep bringing up the fact that, I started running a year ago. I've been winning races. I do 5K races. The last race I won first place in my age group. And immediately after the race, I'm taking notes and analyzing what I did and how I could be better. I don't see this happening with these left-wing movements, right? I see rhetoric that's repeated and echoed over time, and I see most people just accepting it. It sounds good to them. There's not a critical thought process. But in the era of Mamdani, or Mamdani, if you are watching Brain Dead Fox News, what we see is a massive vulnerability right now. Right now, a lot of people are excited on the left about the movement that they're seeing with the DSA, as they should be. However, for years I've been pointing out sort of a blind spot that I've seen on the left, which I definitely see is going to be a problem going forward for sure in this moment. If I wanted political power, what would I have to say to win these people on the left, right? In my view, if I were a bad faith actor, I were a corrupt person focused on my own self-interest, I would be right now in this movement, if I so choose to pander to the left, I'd be walking around talking about genocide more than anybody else. I'd be talking about, housing is a right. I'd be talking about, we got to put a stop to fascism. I'd be talking about the establishment Democrats. It's time for them to step up or step off or something like that. Real aggressive rhetoric, lots of zingers attacking Trump, attacking the Republican Party. I would definitely be referencing, racism and white nationalism and all this kind of white supremacy, whatever. Not so much now. That's not as sexy as it used to be, shall we say. But definitely the genocide talk and the housing is a right talk. I'd be talking about that stuff. I would certainly be promoting Mamdani. And any of these people that are winning, I'd be like, yeah, this is great. And I'm pretty sure that regardless of my integrity, my character, what I'm really about, I'm pretty sure that I could get a lot of these left-wing folks to vote for me just based on me pushing out their talking points. Look at Grant Plattner, right? Lots of issues with Grant Plattner for sure. And even though they dumped him in a pretty hard, pretty aggressive way, look how long it took for them to get to that point. Now imagine someone that is not so overtly sort of controversial, shall we say, that is pushing out those talking points. And you got to understand there's got to be people who are like this. How many we may never know, right? How many people are going to get elected by the left based on just putting out those talking points? Where the thought leaders who, unfortunately, a lot of people on the left depend on for their ideas, focused on content creation and whatever, I get on their radar as someone who's really talking aggressive and I'm saying all the right stuff, right? And they get fooled thinking I'm one of them and I'm a real progressive and I'm a democratic socialist or whatever, right? And they focus on the rhetoric that I'm pushing out, which sounds good. They don't take the time to actually investigate and look into me, see what my history is and what I'm about, what's my character, who is this guy. It's just kind of a going off of my rhetoric, which unfortunately is not just a left-wing thing, right? A lot of American voters vote based on simply words. And even me saying that, they'd be like, what do you mean? What else are we supposed to vote on? Like we have to listen to a politician tell us what they're going to do, and then we have to, trust that they're going to do what they. No, you don't have to, right? It's the same thing like because we're hiring them to work for us, right? It's the same thing like when you're trying to hire someone or do a job interview. Anyone can come in on a job interview and say anything, right? You could say, yes, I'm a hard worker and this and that, and I know all this X, Y, and Z, right? You don't hire someone just based on the words, right? You look at their track record, you look at their resume, and you test and challenge them, right? So, for example, a progressive media channel has somebody on their channel who's running for office talking all this stuff about, genocide, whatever. Are you going to press them aggressively when they seem to be they're sort of virtue signaling that they're on your tribe? Are you going to Majority Report, Breaking Points, whoever these guys on the left that will do interviews, are you going to push them hard and see what they're really about and challenge them, right? Why do you say Gaza, what's happening in Gaza is a genocide? What's the basis for that claim, right? Do they say anything beyond whatever the common rhetoric is? Do they have any ideas of their own, right? Is there any of their character in terms of what their position is come out? Or are they just echoing whatever is popular, whatever people are saying, right? Who's going to do that type of an interview to sort of, suss them out and see, whether they're actually the real deal or not? And if no one's going to do that, they're going to probably get promoted and amplified by the thought leaders on the left, which is going to lead to them getting votes and winning, right? And then when they win, because some of these people are not who they claim to be. Fetterman. They come into office and they get involved in corruption. And we may not know that directly that they are. We just notice that they got in office and nothing's really getting done. There's always excuses. If they're really clever with the rhetoric, they can perhaps, come up with excuses and people may sort of buy it. And then the thing is, once they get in office, they just tweet stuff, right? Tweet all this aggressive stuff and echo popular talking points and give the impression that they're doing their best and they're fighting and we got it this and whatever is trending the most, that's what they're talking about. But in reality, are they really fighting for the people? Are they really pushing these things? What are they doing behind closed doors, right? When they push for something and it doesn't work, is that just because it just couldn't work, or they weren't pushing hard enough because their heart wasn't in it, because they just basically said the stuff to get in office and now they're just going to skate by, right? And as long as they can be aggressive enough with the rhetoric so it sounds like and feels like they're fighting and they're doing stuff. Just like how I see a lot of people, they look at these YouTubers as if they're fighting, right? They put out videos, Trump did this and Trump did that, and then the audience comes in and they're yeah, and then they at the end of the video, help me, let's fight back against fascism, whatever. Like, what's the fight? It's content. They're putting out videos. People are sitting there watching it. Most of them are not even going to vote, right? And voting is the bare minimum. If all you do is vote, you're wasting your time. Voting is the beginning. That's it. Bare minimum is voting, right? If you have an audience that you're not even training these concepts, such as voting alone is wasting your time, right? If you're not putting that message out, but you're just saying, Trump is this and Trump is that, and then when some person talks about, I'm a Democrat, socialist, you're promoting them and like, yeah, right? If you're not training your voters how to be, your audience, how to be discerning voters and how to figure out who's real and who's not, that's going to lead to a lot of phonies getting elected. And then it's going to make the movement look bad when they fail, right? Obviously, the right wing is going to jump on any failures whatsoever, right? The other thing is you have someone like Mamdani who wins, does some great things. If you have a very limited vision, then you say he's awesome, right? The limited vision is you look at what we've gotten historically and you say we used to get this and now we're getting this. That's awesome. It's 10 times as much as the last guy. But if you're not so limited in your thinking, then you don't focus on, what we had before. In fact, you don't even care about what we had before. Only thing you care about is, like me, I care about what we need now. If we need this, all I care about is, are you meeting the moment and how close to meeting the moment you are, right? I'm not going to be impressed by you being 3 times as good as the last guy when there's a massive gap between what's needed and what you deliver. Mamdani is not meeting the moment. And it's not a surprise to me, right? Because I don't have this vulnerability of just getting caught up, right? I saw when he was running some good signs. He definitely got my attention. But I figured that, for all the scary talk about radical whatever, I figured it was going to be more or less milquetoast. Again, if you're comparing historically, you wouldn't see that, because compared to historically, it's not milquetoast. He's doing amazing, right? But it's kind of like, you have a sales team, right? And the last guy was selling 100 units a month, and that was embarrassing. That was, just struggling to get by. 100 units a month. This guy comes in and he's selling 200 units a month. That's double the last guy. And you're like, yeah. Problem is, in order to break even, you need to sell 1,000 units a month. You need to sell 1,000. The last guy was selling 100. This guy's selling twice the last guy. If you're in a Kyle Kulinski camp, you're impressed. Double, he did better than I expected. That's what Kyle said about Biden, right? That's the limited thought process or limited vision that people like him have. And by him being limited in his vision, so does his audience, right? And he's not the only one. I think across the board, a lot of the left-wing media have very limited vision, right? The things that I would push for, they would say, it's crazy, that'll never happen. It takes time and blah, 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 blah. But all throughout my life, I've done things that people say can't be done, right? I don't believe in what can't be done, right? I don't believe in impossible. I don't believe in limitations. Obviously, I can't do anything I want to do, but I can certainly do far more than even I would expect I can do. And the reason for that is because I don't accept no for an answer. The reason is because I have the biggest possible vision for things I want to do. I don't limit my sort of thought process in terms of what is possible. The left-wing movement, I think, is too limited in their thinking, right? We need a revolution. But the left is so demoralized by what's been happening that their vision of a revolution is probably barely getting to something that is somewhat sensible in terms of how our government should run, right? But people can't pay rent. People don't have health care. People are literally dying. They need massive change. We need a left-wing Trump that will push hard and don't let anybody tell them, no, you can't do it. But someone who will push like that for good, right? For all the left-wing folks who would, talk to me about, that'll never happen, or this is too aggressive, or whatever it is, tell that to Donald Trump. If he can accomplish what he's been able to accomplish against all odds, I mean, this guy's basically reforming our entire government in his image. If he can do that for evil, why can't the left do the same thing for good? Well, it starts with you got to have that vision in the first place. If you don't have that vision, it's not going to happen. But also, you got to be better at vetting people. Now, I know there's a thing about this sort of purity testing and things like that, and that's not what we're talking about, right? We don't want anybody that's perfect. We're not looking to, you must do everything exactly the way we want. But what we do want as a minimum standard is we want someone who's willing to go to war, right? We need someone at a minimum who's willing to go to war. And they ain't gonna let nobody tell them that they can't do something that they put their mind to. And ultimately, the fundamental part that works, that makes that work in terms of success, is there's nothing that they can't do that they put their minds to with the support of we the people who have the most power by far. And the fact that you don't hear that a lot of times in left-wing media, they keep saying we don't have a democracy doesn't work, and Congress is doing one thing and we want, and the donors control everything. Like, that's the very passive message you get from left-wing media, right? That is bullshit. We have the most power in this country by far. No special interest group or trillionaire or anyone else comes close to the power that we, the people, have. But if your thought leaders are not educating you about that, then that would be why we're doing pathetic protests that, 7 million people in the streets, and we think that's impressive. Again, limited vision. We're looking at things historically. Compared to the past, this is a lot of people. Compared to the moment, pathetic. Minimum 25 million people in the street. That's the moment we're in, right? I hear a lot of rhetoric about fascism and this country is being destroyed and it's going to take us decades to whatever. The rhetoric is like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah. But then the way they treat it is not on the same level. They're treating it, they're talking about it like, oh my goodness. But then they're acting like, right? If things are really as bad as they say it is, where is the 25 million people in the streets protesting? Where is the general strike that lasts? Where is the Tesla strike, Facebook strike, or not strike, more boycott? Where's the Tesla, Facebook, everyone who is snuggling up to Donald Trump? Where's the left-wing movement saying, we're not going to give you any more of our money. I hear the rhetoric doesn't match the reality and the actions, right? I hear about billionaires shouldn't exist. Meanwhile, a lot of the money these billionaires have comes from the left, right? The left will talk about billionaires, we need to tax them or whatever. How about you stop giving them your money? Right? If we can't even do a Tesla boycott that lasts more than a few months or however long it lasts, which is pathetic, how is there ever going to be a revolution? I think the American people are broken. Things have been so bad for so long that the fighting spirit that we once had, the fighting spirit that got us all these amazing rights that we have today, that generation of people willing to put their lives on the line to fight for justice is long gone. Yes, there are some people who are on that level, but for the most part, we're the generation of the black squares on Instagram. We want to walk in the streets and hold up a sign and chant something, but we're not willing to put actions behind it. Why should the politicians care that you're in the street holding a sign? There should be some kind of action, some kind of threat connected to the movements. Going around and saying, we don't want any king, no kings, no kings, no kings, right? We don't want fascism, right? It's good. It's getting in the news, getting people thinking about it, but it's not meeting the moment, right? If you're going to do all that and there's not some threats connected to it where if politicians ignore you, they suffer massively, then what does it matter? And these are basics, right? If the left wing doesn't even understand that, you just can't go on the street and yell stuff, right? We have to, this is the one time you should look at historical context, right? Look at what movements we had in the past. There are movements that accomplished a lot based on not just yelling in the streets. It was like, listen, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, this is going to happen. And politicians got the message real quick. What's the threat right now? What's the threat right now? Establishment Democrats are still in power. And the fact that many people on the left don't even realize that. They feel like they're out of power and they lost. Lost what? They're still getting paid. They're still insider trading. They're still being treated like celebrities, as they've been for decades. The only people that lost are us. Just some things to think about. If you want to win. If you really believe the words that you say. But who am I? Just a guy on the internet, right? Everybody else is telling you something else. Maybe I'm wrong. That's for you to decide.